Welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see you all here. Welcome to this third FH community webinar on the COVID impact on CVD patient community. Will the vaccine bring needed reassurance? That is the main topic that we're covering today. I'm far from being a medical expert, so I'll just stick with the housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on YouTube after in the next few days, possibly even today. The session structure, just to let you know, we're going to have, we have 4 panelists in total. They're going to talk us through their different introductions and views on the topic. And Dr. Samuel Gidding is really guiding us through this. He is the chief panelist, or really moderating the whole event. So we'll hear from all the different panelists. We have only very few slides. We'll cover a few topics, and then we've cornered out the last section of the webinar for Q&A. So you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A option. So at any point during the webinar, you're welcome to add your questions there. You can direct them at one panelist or at everybody, and we will do our best to moderate those and collect those and answer those at the end of the session. The chat is open, so we welcome you to let us know where you're watching from, or also to just general comments in there, but try to keep the Q&A in the Q&A section if at all possible, so to make it easier for us to direct the questions. And I've just added in the chat a link to a poll. We're going to be using a system called Slido for the polls, and I'll load that up now on the screen so that you can see it. And the first poll is very simple. We just want to know who you represent. Are you a member of the patient community, the medical community, the industry community, or other? And you can vote by clicking on the link that I put in the chat, or you can scan that QR code on your phone if you like. That works as well. Or just go to slido.com and type in the hashtag FHWeb. We'd love to hear from you so we get a good understanding of who is online, and so that we can direct the content and the way we answer the questions in the best way possible. So thank you to everybody who's already answered. We have 9 replies at the moment, a larger portion of patient community, but also medical community, pretty balanced as you can see on the screen. So keep answering that as we go through, and we'll do a few more polls throughout the event, and I'll make sure to share the screen as we go. So with that, I'd like to hand over the virtual stage to Magdalena Dacour, the Chief Executive of FH Europe. Magdalena, the virtual stage is yours.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much. And once again, hello, good evening, good morning, everyone. Really great to have you, especially tonight, at this very special webinar addressing quite a hot topic. I understand and I appreciate how important it is for many of you as patients, and for many of you who deal with the patient community. There is a lot to be said, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. So on this occasion, I will actually skip through my usual slides trying to promote FH Europe and explaining what we are as an organization. The only thing I would like to do is put it into context why we're having those webinars. It's actually, you should be able to see it on your screens now. It's actually a cycle of webinars as part of our annual meeting for the network. We would normally have those topics as part of our face-to-face gathering, which normally happen in November 7th virtually, but we wanted to open up to a wider community and provide as much information to help you throughout this quite challenging year. Previous webinars that we've hosted, they were in relation to the Global FH Registry. So webinar number 1, you should be able to see on the screen, and webinar number 2, which was around the latest medical updates for patients with genetic dyslipidemias. As Miguel already mentioned, all of those have been recorded and they are available on the YouTube channel. And I would love to share with you that we are currently working on making sure that those are as well available in local languages, so as many people as possible can actually benefit from that. And without further ado, it is my absolute privilege and pleasure to have with us tonight fabulous international expert speakers, but also members of our network joining and addressing very pressing topic of COVID, the impact on our community, and the potential and hope that the vaccine is bringing to Europe. With that, I will hand over to our chief panelist, who will introduce then the panel. Thank you so much. Hopefully you will find it useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Magda. I haven't been called a chief in quite some time. I'm Sam Gidding. I'm a pediatric cardiologist. I'm in Vermont. I suspect I'm not going to be straying very far from this room where I'm speaking until I get vaccinated. And that's kind of the importance of COVID-19 to all of us who have some risk or at risk. You know, it's a global pandemic. And I think the purpose of this webinar is really to address some of these more personal issues and concerns, and particularly how COVID impacts the FH community. I'd like to kick off the discussion by just asking people a couple of opinion questions, which I think are going to be themes that we're going to discuss later in the hour. And the first question asks, do you think you're actually acting in a more healthy fashion or less healthy fashion than before the COVID epidemic? So you can answer, I'm engaging in more healthy behaviors, it's about the same, or I'm really succumbing to less healthy behaviors, poor eating, sedentary behavior, not taking care of myself like I should. So go ahead and answer, and we'll see how things go.
And you should be able to see a link to this in your chat. So please use the link in the chat, everyone.
And the link, just to say, the link will be the same throughout the session for all the polls. So if you keep that tab open, you can answer any of the polls that we present. Quite a mixed results there, Sam.
Yeah, up and down. Okay. The second question would be to rate your level of anxiety about COVID. So from 1 to 10, give your rating.
My apologies, we're having a 1 to 5 rating in this case.
1 to 5. So 5 is most anxious. Looks like it's tilted towards anxiety. All right, so what we've seen is amongst the people who are on the call that some people there have been a substantial number of people who've improved their health behaviors, but a substantial number who are behaving less healthy, and there's a fair amount of anxiety about the presence of COVID. First, I think also the way the panel is going to be organized is we have individuals to present a patient perspective, a public health perspective, and a medical perspective. So first, I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves. Neil, would you like to give your background regarding the call?
Sure, Sam. Thank you very much. And thank you and Magda for the opportunity to be part of this panel. I certainly don't claim to be an expert as introduced, and so I'm really speaking as somebody who works very closely with the cardiovascular patient community. I, for the past 28 years, have been leading an Irish not-for-profit heart and stroke foundation. In more recent years, additionally, the National Institute for Prevention and Cardiovascular Health in Ireland. And then more recently, again, I've been one of the founders of an attempt to bring together the heart failure patient community internationally by establishing the Global Heart Hub. And the Global Heart Hub is really new and an emerging umbrella of heart patient organizations. And I noticed that on this call, there are quite a lot of patient representatives, patient organizations from Eastern Europe. And I would say I would ask you, if you are a member of a patient organization, to perhaps check out globalhearthub.org, because we're very interested in trying to bring together as many representatives of the patient community as possible. And actually, Eastern Europe is poorly represented in our network at the moment.
Marius?
Good evening, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Mario Janta. I'm a medical doctor. I founded the Center for Innovation in Medicine, a not-for-profit organization, 6 years ago in Bucharest. This year, I joined the FH Europe as a trustee, and I'm very happy to do that. And in this context of COVID-19 pandemic, I'm one of the key communicators, especially around the vaccine, here in Romania. Thanks.
Thank you. And now Maral from Turkey will give us some important insights from the medical side of things.
Well, I'm a cardiologist from Turkey. I'm working on lipids and also the prevention for more than 20 years. And I'm so glad to be here and proud of to be here at the panel to guide you for the increased risk of cardiovascular involvement during the COVID course. So shall I go with my slides or just?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, let me share my slides. Well, I want to show you a picture. It's really, I was really happy to see such a picture. It was painted by a medical student, and it depicts the importance of heart and vessels during the course of the COVID-19. As you can see here, she has painted the heart on the top of the lungs and also the vessels, and also shows that these involvement could be important in young patients. So the age is not important for the involvement heart and vessels during the course of the disease. Well, from the observational studies, we know that some people are more vulnerable to COVID-19. People with older age, male gender, and also patients who are known to have heart disease are really could have a worse course during the disease. But obesity is really important, and even at very young ages, people with obesity could have a worse prognosis during the COVID-19. Hypertension and smoking is also bad to have a COVID-19. But here, I wanted to emphasize the LDL levels and also probably the LP(a). If they are high, they increase the risk of the complications of COVID-19, we suggest. The involvement of heart could be could happen up to 20 to 40%, but of course we don't know the exact numbers in whole the population with COVID-19. But we know that if a patient has an additional cardiovascular involvement, it increases the mortality of COVID-19 about 10%. The involvement of the heart and vessel could be during the early or late in the course of the disease. It could be directly to the virus, or it could be to the indirect effects of the virus, such as inflammation or increased coagulation. And it could be in the picture of myocarditis, the involvement of the heart muscle, the pericarditis. Even young people may suffer from heart attack due to increased coagulation during the course of the disease. It could lead to heart failure and all kind of arrhythmia. Even the life-threatening ones could happen during the course of the COVID if there's a involvement of the heart. As cardiologists, we are really afraid of COVID because it has three different pictures according to us. The first one is the first way. It is directly to the infection of the COVID-19. This is the first one we call first way. But for us, there's a second way. And this is also very important for the increase in the numbers of heart attacks and cardiovascular involvement, it is due to the delay of seeking health care for chronic conditions. And the third one is the impact of pandemic, lockdown, social distancing on the management of cardiovascular risk factors. Let me simply go through them. The second one was the decrease in the number of admissions due to heart attacks during the pandemic. As you can see here, it's now just almost 1 year. But as you can see here, with the increasing number of patients with COVID disease, the number of heart attack admissions are decreasing compared to the previous years. There's about 50% decrease in these admissions. And we can easily say that all around the world, and of course in Europe, the admissions of heart attacks, also the chronic disease of the heart, are almost halved across Europe. This is an important finding. And in Turkey, we wanted to discover why the people are coming to hospital late and also in reduced numbers. And we compared the pre-pandemic period with the pandemic period about the timings from the symptom onset to the percutaneous coronary intervention, the balloon angioplasty. And as you can see here, the blue bars show the time from the symptom onset, namely the angina pectoris initiation, to the call of the emergency medical service. As you can see here, there is an almost 60 minutes late arrival compared to the pre-pandemic period during the pandemic, but the rest of the timings are working very well, not different before the pandemic. So this means that the late arrival of the people to the hospital during the heart attacks was just related to patient's choice. And we can say that this was the fear of contracting the virus in the hospitals. So this can be called as medical care avoidance, leading to late admissions. And the picture, of course, is resulting, as we can see from the graphics, increased deaths and increased numbers of heart failures during the in-hospital period. And the third effect of the pandemic or COVID is the effect of the social distancing, increased anxiety, on the effect of impact of cardiovascular risk factors. In Turkey, we worked on patients with a history of premature myocardial infarction. With just telemedicine, we asked them how they feel about their lifestyle, physical activity, and I want you to concentrate the results here. More than 50% of the patients had a disturbed healthy lifestyle behaviors. More than 50% of the patient had a severe reduction in the physical activity, and their compliance to healthy diet was reduced in 30% of the patients. And there is an increased anxiety in almost 70% of the patients. And they were talking about medical care avoidance in 30% of the patients. But I want to remind you that these people were the ones with high compliance to treatment, who are aware of the risk of myocardial infarction because they had a history in their life about myocardial infarction. So all these would have a severe impact on the control of the cardiovascular risk factors, leading to increased prevalence of cardiovascular disease. So deterioration of the management of the cardiovascular risk factors, leading to the numbers of increased cardiovascular events and also resulting in increased mortality. And I want to remind you that we are very sure about the statins and lipid-lowering therapy during the pandemic. We know that from the animal models that the virus itself, the coronavirus, enters the host cells through a specific receptor, and the blood cholesterol level is high, then its entry to the host cells is doubles. So this is very important, and the observational data is showing that patients receiving statins had an improved survival compared to patients not receiving statins. So in general, we are recommending to all people and to all our patients that statin therapy should not be discontinued due to the global concern of the pandemic or in patients hospitalized for the COVID. So in summary, I want you to remember this picture, that the heart and vessels are important in the COVID-19 disease, and people with age or people with high cholesterol and or heart disease should protect themselves from contracting the virus because they could have a worse prognosis during the disease. They're prone to the complications, and they should continue to healthy lifestyle during the pandemic. And they should not forget about their individual LDL targets. And statin therapy should not be discontinued during the hospitalization or during the pandemic. And in case of cardiac symptoms, they should immediately admit to the hospital to have a better survival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maral, for a really both sobering and very thoughtful presentation.
Thank you.
Neil, from a lot of the important points that Maral was raising, what are you hearing from your own kind of patient constituency that is parallel to that or similar? You know, anxiety, access to drugs, delay in care, all those issues.
So Sam, when the COVID sort of pandemic reached our part of the world, and I'm in Ireland, we started to wonder precisely the question you're asking, what was the impact here? And so the Global Heart Hub conducted a survey of patient organizations across 19 countries, which included US, Latin America, and Europe. And unsurprisingly, that survey confirmed that the patients' greatest fear was the fear of contracting the virus, but their second biggest fear was actually going to their doctor or going to hospital. And this finding coincided with the announcements that were coming from many of the clinical societies and hospitals, which were supporting exactly what Maral has outlined, that there was a rapid or a significant rather and sudden decrease in the number of presentations at hospitals. She mentioned 50% decrease in MI admissions, for example. In some hospitals in Ireland, admissions actually dropped by 75% for cardiac conditions, quite amazing. And we now know, of course, that that was, I guess, an unintended consequence of probably the most powerful public health message of all time. Literally, the entire world was saying, stay at home. And they were strongly encouraging those in the older age group or those with cardiovascular risk to absolutely stay at home. So it's not surprising that we saw what we saw. And of course, the detrimental consequences of this are now people are presenting, and you hear clinicians speak of seeing people in coronary care now with conditions that are a level of deterioration that they may not have seen in 40 years before modern treatments had become available. So it's a very serious situation, and it hasn't been resolved. And I'm not sure how recent Maral's survey has been in terms of where people are at right now, but in the patient community, understandably, there is still a very high level of anxiety, and it's a difficult issue to address, despite the fact that a lot of the health systems have now managed to create pathways which are largely COVID-free. But it's a big challenge, and I see that ESC, for example, are about to launch a further campaign to reaffirm the importance. And I suppose I would say that to the patients on the line, that the evidence is there in black and white that yes, COVID is a very scary and high risk condition, and particularly with an underlying cardiovascular condition, but your risk of dying from a cardiovascular disease is far greater than dying from COVID. And we mustn't forget that, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important. And I think, I mean, it's almost a two-edged sword too, because you don't want healthcare personnel catching COVID from patients. I know in the US, at least half the basic primary care visits haven't occurred, so basic maintenance care across diseases. So Marius, what is the public health response to this type of information?
Yes, for many months, we actually seen that the public health measures were quite similar with the public health measures and advices we not actually we, but we as a humanity experienced from 100 years ago with this Spanish flu pandemic, wearing the mask, avoiding the gatherings, staying home, all type of measures, this type of measures were in place in most of the countries for many months. And actually this was the main or the only available in the type of interventions that we have in order to control the pandemic. And I asked a few months ago what actually we did in the last 100 years if we are not able as a society to have more solutions or more innovations in order to have a better control of the pandemic. And fortunately, we have seen in November data coming from phase 3 clinical studies with 3 vaccines. And now in December, we can discuss about a vaccine, Pfizer and BioNTech vaccine that is already approved for emergency use authorization in United Kingdom and United States and other countries, Singapore or Canada. And we expect the same conditional approval in the European Union next week, next Monday. We expect from the European Commission. I think it's very important to understand that actually it's something for history of medicine and research and innovation, because we have been able to identify the virus 30 days after the first case was reported in China. And starting that day and to the day when the first person was vaccinated outside of clinical trials, we can number 331 days from identifying the virus to the first person vaccinated outside of a clinical trial. It's clear that it's it's something historic. It's not just a matter of record, it's something historic. And we discuss about a new technology, messenger RNA, that is actually the base for this vaccine. The technology is not new, was around for in the last 30 to 40 years. We have to say that. And I think that actually the level of maturity of technologies like next generation sequencing, who provide us all the tools and informations necessary to identify the virus. And this type of technology, messenger RNA, actually we're at the perfect point to provide value in this fight against pandemic, allowing the regulatory authorities to approve for emergency use the vaccines. We know so far that the vaccine, the Pfizer BioNTech, is approved for people with age starting at 16 to 85. The safety profile is, I may say, is very good. It's very good. And we expect also to have other approvals for other vaccines. Some of them, like Moderna, based on the same technologies, but also other vaccines in the years to come, in the months to come. What we are not known for the moment. We don't know how long is the protection, how long the antibodies will last after the vaccination. And we don't have data yet, at least for the Pfizer vaccine. We don't know if the vaccine prevents the transmission of the virus. I will stop here, and I'm sure that we'll have a lot of questions, and I'm very happy to engage with you discussing around the vaccine.
Yeah, so that was, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information packed into what you just said. I think, I mean, the thing that really struck me was that from a public health perspective, kind of sticking to the fundamentals of both surveillance and control is really key. You know, I think on the ground, when you get the patient perspective, you know, that the anxiety, the concern, you know, the impact on care at the physician level, you're dealing with stuff on a day-to-day basis. But it actually, if you can kind of step back and realize that from the first infection reported to the vaccine of 331 days, there really is an extraordinary accomplishment. I think we'll get into the details of the vaccine in a few minutes, but I think getting back to the importance of just simple surveillance and then control as basic principles to kind of steer this from a larger perspective is really important. Magda, I know you're not a panelist, but I know you've been involved with the messaging around a lot of these anxieties, concerns about care, and interfacing with different organizations. So maybe could you just comment a little bit on the messaging? And maybe Neil, you could also comment a little bit on the messaging also to try and either allay anxieties or improve care.
Absolutely, and thank you for this question, Sam. I know that there is a lot of people on the call from different patient organizations and patients, and I really, really invite you to raise your questions to help us understand better. My experience so far participating in the EMA public hearing, so the European Medicines Agency public hearing, where different patient groups were speaking and raising their concerns. And having been recently, only over the weekend, having the pleasure to speak to a Swiss patient organization and the people over there, I realized that there is still a lot of concern around side effects. How much is there available knowledge about how this specific vaccine will impact specifically patients on existing treatment with CVD and so on and so forth. We also know that there are questions raised around how soon will I get it? Will I be eligible for the treatment? Because we know that different countries in Europe are introducing different country-specific regulations in terms of who's going to get first, who's going to be the priority risk group. And we obviously know that the CVD group is a high-risk group. I know that there are some objections among people saying, you know, shall I wait? Shall I go and try and get vaccination as soon as it's available in my country? And I think the whole idea here was to allow and address those questions and answer and support them with research that's available. But I would like to bring Neil here, because I know that in Ireland you are actually doing something extraordinary to put your beneficiaries and their interest in the front line in terms of CVD group. It would be interesting to know, maybe, Neil.
So I think you're probably referring there to a recent joint statement from patient organizations in the country who were, I suppose, advocating to ensure that the most vulnerable were certainly prioritized. And in the most vulnerable category, of course, you're talking about CVD patients. And I think I wouldn't attribute the government decision necessarily to that move, but I think that is pretty much in line with what the government are now doing. So As you say, it looks like there's a different approach in different countries, but certainly as a cardiovascular community, I think we need to be very strong in advocating for ensuring that our community are first in line, really, because you know, one of the things we got to realize is that once the sort of pandemic hit and people were talking about the underlying risks for those with the heightened risk for those with underlying cardiovascular disease, there was almost a centralized across all countries decision made. We must lock these people away. We must keep them at home, and that decision has had enormous consequences for a cohort of people who had no choice and were not consulted. And I'm not saying that if they were consulted that things would be different, but there is something different about being told you must do this without any consultation, as opposed to let's have a conversation and understand why you must do this. So I think actually the older age group and the cardiovascular community have been particularly, I guess, disadvantaged in this whole virus. So I think now when it comes to, if you were prioritizing, I think they need to be very highly ranked in the priority list.
So Maral, Neil brings up some really good points. You had talked about the 3 phases of the epidemic, and Neil brings up the need, both the fatigue and concerns that both the fatigue patients are experiencing, concerns about being locked down without knowing exactly what are the most beneficial behaviors. What have you observed in your practice over the last 9 months or so? How have things evolved? And then how are you preparing for getting your patients to get vaccinated?
Well, this is the 9th month from the first case in Turkey. And during that period, at the beginning, people were very afraid of the virus. So they were very keen on the social distancing. They were protecting themselves. But during the summertime, everybody forgot about the disease. And this led to the increased numbers of COVID cases. And with the winter coming, again, the cases, there is a very steep increase in the numbers of cases. And again, people realize the importance of being very far away from the COVID-19. So people are really thinking about having the vaccine, but they have some concerns about it. And many think that after vaccination, they will get rid of the masks and social distancing. But we are really trying to tell them that vaccination will not make us not to use the mask and social distancing. We need the vaccination to terminate the pandemic, to protect ourselves, but we have to use the personal protection equipment and social distancing, even though we are vaccinated. And we are trying to use the telemedicine and Zoom or other facilities to come together with our patients. For example, next week we will do in our university a local call to our patients, and we will tell about the vaccination and other problems and try to answer the questions of them. And we will try to make them confident about the vaccine. Of course, there could be problems, but I think we really need it. So otherwise, there will be no option to terminate the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. So we want to move on to questions from the group. So if people want to type in some questions, I'm just going to do a brief summary. You know, I think we've heard a very broad perspective on the impact of COVID from a medical, from a personal, and a public health perspective. I think what's a clear gap that's been pointed out on all fronts is the lack of public understanding of the importance of basic public health practices, of the surveillance and control. You know, we're used to the medical model and our own care, but it's really as well applying these broad public health principles that can get things under control. I think I want to talk briefly about the vaccines, as I think there's some concern about the mechanism of how they're developed. And I'm not an expert on this, but I'll try and say a few things. What's called the mRNA technology, what does that mean? Well, mRNA is a molecule that's related to DNA, and it's injected in the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine as a vehicle to actually get into your own cells. And the mRNA produces a protein that's in the COVID virus itself that then gets to your cells and gets onto the surface of your cells. Your body's immune system recognizes that as foreign and then develops an antibody response to that. So instead of being infected by the virus, like, or a typical live virus vaccine where you get the virus and that triggers the response, your body actually triggers the response for itself. And as I understand the data, that's actually been more powerful than has been typically observed from regular vaccines. Now, there are a group of vaccines that will be killed virus vaccines that are more typical to some of the other vaccine strategies. And then there's a third strategy related to injecting a protein, which will then also trigger an immune response. So some of these mechanisms are novel, but they've also been used before in other therapeutics and have been shown to be fairly effective. I think it seems pretty extraordinary, actually, the safety profiles, or not the efficacy profiles, but I think people can expect that they will have some symptoms from this as the body responds. I think one of the things that's important to remember is that a lot of times when you get sick, your symptoms are actually related to your own body's immune response, which is part of the fever and not feeling well. So the response to a potent vaccine may also be that same response, but it's not harmful or going to hurt you in a severe way.
Having said that, Sam, we do know that there were some side effects registered instantaneously almost the same day in the UK, right? Mm-hmm. But we know that those are people with already history of allergic conditions.
Right. I mean, I think side effects are going to occur, but side effects are a lot less. I mean, nobody that I'm aware of has died from the vaccine. In the same day in the US, there were 3,000 deaths. So I think it's true. I think we have to be able to provide the education that there will be side effects, but death is a more important side effect of getting. Maral or Marius, do you have any comments on the vaccine?
Yes, I have a comment on the adverse events, especially the allergies, and I follow the discussion around the approval in the UK, and the allergies per se were included in the precautions. It's not a contraindication, it's a precaution. And as you, Magda, said, immediately after the vaccination started in UK, were 2 cases of severe allergies with anaphylaxis. This is actually we discussed about. And then the day after, I followed the FDA public discussion around the approval for emergency use of the Pfizer vaccine, and the documentation was adapted actually in real time. And the FDA mentioned that we have to distinguish between the severe allergies and, let's say, the common allergies. I think this is the way we'll manage in the next months this topic of adverse events and the way people react to the vaccine. And for that, we have to, to be very honest with our audience. We have to be transparent, to put the data into the context. And because this, I think, are the main pillars for to increase the trust of the population, which is not easy. We have seen that most of us are actually anxious.
Okay, so we're getting some questions now. So first, Maral, you mentioned continuing to wear masks. Maybe you could deal with that question briefly.
Yeah. We have to continue wearing masks after vaccinated, because even though vaccinated, we can transfer the virus to other people. And also, we don't know how long will be the antibodies will be present after vaccination. So for a period of time, we have to wear the masks even though we are vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm going to deal with a couple of these medical questions. I think about the risk of CVD when you get vaccinated. I actually don't think there's an increased risk, because you're not actually getting a virus as part of the vaccination. So you're not getting the risk of the myocarditis and inflammatory effects or precipitation of a heart attack is not there. There's questions on interactions of the vaccine with HoFH or other cholesterol lowering medications. Maral, do you want to answer that?
As far as we know, that there should be no interaction with the treatment agent with vaccines, because the vaccine will be creating an antibody not to interact with the liver or other parts of the body or other medications. So we don't want, we hope that there will be no adverse reactions or interaction between the agents and the vaccine.
Yeah.
Sam, can I just interject there, just in relation to the question about the risk of CVD from vaccines? And I could be wrong, but it could be possible that the questioner is actually relating to the fact that there's some evidence, particularly among young people, that the virus is precipitating sudden cardiac arrest or some other, let's say, electrical malfunction. So it might be just the terminology there that, a cardiac event as opposed to a cardiovascular disease.
Yeah. I mean, I think, there have been over 30-some thousand people in these clinical trials. And I think that that type of side effect would have been, uncovered in the trials. The other thing that I think is interesting is that because medical personnel will be among the first to get the vaccine, they're going to be the most acute observers of what's going on with the vaccine. So I think that, in a way, to me, helps ensure the safety, because the medical personnel will recognize anything adverse that is happening within themselves. And so I think you will get good reporting of any adverse effects that occur in a larger scale. And then I think from the original clinical trials, there will be continued follow-up of all the people that are in the trials. The number of people who've been in these trials is actually much larger than typical vaccine trials. So I think that also is encouraging. There's a question about the allergic reactions, and I admit to not knowing as much as I should about them. Marius, do you have any additional information on that?
No, I just mentioned that FDA cleared that, and I think the most practical point is that first the doctors has to be aware that the severe allergy might be a problem on one end. The other type of allergies are not, it's just a precautious. The patients who previously had allergy to one of the components of this vaccine has to discuss this with the medical doctor. And is another important thing is the way the vaccination centers are equipped. They have to have in place the emergency kit if severe allergy will be, at the person who is vaccinated to be able to intervene very fast and to save the life.
Sam, can I just make a comment
Sure.
there? And I think it's in the chat as well. I believe the first 2 reported cases were in our neighbouring country, the UK. 2 medical personnel had an adverse reaction. I believe it subsequently transpired that they, in any case, had underlying severe reaction. What would you call it? Predisposition, and were actually individuals who were using EpiPen, so therefore, they already, they were already in a high risk category in that regard.
Yeah, there's a question about, thank you. There's a question about which vaccine should you take. I really don't think we know the answer to that question right now because the trials did not compare vaccines. I think you just have to look at the efficacy data and what's available to you. I mean, for myself, I've just been kind of doing the math in my head as to which vaccine is likely to be available for me based on how much people are able to buy and what the supplies are and where I'd be in the queue to get it. So I think that if it's approved, then, it's probably, I think you can be assured that it's safe. I've listened to the EMA and the FDA webinars on the approval process for these vaccines, and it is extraordinarily rigorous in that regard, with close attention to side effects and complications. There was a question on Lp(a) and COVID and the inflammatory storm. I'm not aware of any Lp(a) specific studies during COVID. Meral, are you familiar with any Lp(a) specific studies?
No, there has been no study for Lp(a), but we know that Lp(a) is a lipid fraction for the patients I'm explaining. And it is structure looks like plasminogen, so it increases the risk of thrombosis. So during the COVID course, there is a very increased risk of coagulation, and in patients with high Lp(a), so the thrombogeneity will be duplicated. So it's increasing the risk of thrombus formation, but for cytokine storm, we don't know.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I agree with that completely. So we're now down to towards the end. We had one last question to ask of the audience. Are you ready to take the vaccine or not? Yes or no. So Miguel, do you have that question up in the chat?
Just saying, I just added the link in the chat and you see it on the screen now, so you can see the results coming in.
Thank you. And just to add, Sam, there are still few questions in the Q&A if we do manage to answer those if we have time. But I just wanted to reassure everyone on the call, we will try to compile all those questions, and EMA, the European Medicines Agency, actually ask all patient groups to come back to them and in the process submit any questions or any concerns that might come in this period right now. So you can still take this opportunity and type your questions that might not have been answered. We will compile those and send to the appropriate contact at EMA, supporting all requests that come from specifically CVD patient groups. It is also an opportunity for them as a main regulator to address some of the concerns and act upon those. So please do take that opportunity and type if you have any further questions, please.
Well, I'd like to thank our panelists for a very stimulating discussion. I think we covered the range of topics we wanted to get across. Miguel, do you have any other housekeeping issues?
No, I'd hand over to Magdalena to wrap up, but just to say we had a yes for the vaccine of 63%, no of 13, and 1/4 of the audience is not sure. So interesting results there.
Thank you.
Actually, I had a surprise question, and I will put the panel on the spot right now. If you had a possibility to vaccine today, would you go for it or not? Meryl?
I would go.
Sam?
I would have been there yesterday.
What about you, Neil?
I'm actually in the not sure category, but not so much that I'm just maybe more anxious than not sure.
Thank you for your honesty. What about you, Marius?
Yes.
That was a very quick answer. I think we still have a long queue ahead of us before the actual vaccinations come to an average, so to say, citizen in every country. It's a slow rolling out program. So far in Europe, we only know about vaccinations being administered in the UK. So there is still a lot of questions, concerns, but also answers are coming slowly. I know that some of you have been asking about the long-term side effects. We will be reporting those as much as we can in collaboration with the regulators in Europe. There was one point specifically about any recommendations. I think it's a subject that we could potentially address from the FH Europe perspective. Other than that, I would like to wholeheartedly thank our panelists for taking the time and joining us from literally, well, I say 2 continents, but Meryl can speak for almost like the other side of Turkey, so almost counting for 3 continents joining us. Thank you so much for everyone who participated as a listener. I would like to take that opportunity, and for those who are gearing up for Christmas, wish you a safe celebration. Don't forget about social distancing. Try to enjoy it in smaller gatherings, keeping in mind that like that you might protect your family members. And I would like to wish all of us that 2021 will be a year of successful vaccination process, a lot safer, less lockdowns, and a lot more health coming back to our lives. Thank you, everyone, and I invite you to follow us on YouTube for the recording of this webinar. Thank you.